Maya Angelou she's an extraordinary woman, and she's all sorts of things. She's she's a singer, she's a dancer, she's a black activist, she's a wonderful writer, and above all else, I think she's an alchemist, because she has transformed the circumstances, the daunting circumstances of her beginnings in life into one of the most beautiful and magical books I have ever read, which is I Know Now Why the Caged Bird Sings. And her two following books have been eagerly awaited. The new one is just published, which is Singin' and Swingin' and Getting Merry Like Christmas. And I'm delighted to introduce Maya Angelou, and looking forward to hearing her reading from her work. Maya Angelou.
Thank you. Just a minute ago, I was signing some books, and there were two sound people standing to my left, to your right. And I suppose the question was asked, who's going to speak first? I'm the tallest, blackest female up here. And this is how I was described. That lady in the blue. She does not know her beauty. She thinks her brown body has no glory. If she could dance naked under palm trees and see her image in the river, she would know. But there are no palm trees on the street, and dishwater gives back no images. That's a poem written by a black male poet writing in the 30s. As a piece of poetry, it's perfect. Its lyricism is obvious. Its poetic structure is inarguable. But when you really look into the poem, you see that Mr. Cooney, Waring Cooney, used his genius to extract from a condition with which, alas, we're all too familiar, the essence of that condition. What happens when any human being in the world asks herself or himself, am I really worth it? Am I, me, Jenny, George, Frank, am I really, really worth it? Am I worth asking of my society the best it should, must, and can give me? Am I worth asking of my beloveds, my family, my tribe, my friends, my sex, the best they should, could, and must give me? And finally, am I worth asking of myself the very best I can do, almost all the time, to be ruthlessly present, ferociously present in every moment? Am I really worth it? I write autobiography. I use the first person singular. I hope I'm always talking about the third person plural. I write through the black experience. That's what I know. I'm talking about the human condition, what it is like to be a human being, what makes us laugh, smile, smirk, frown, scowl, stumble, fall, and rise again. What is it in us that makes every person in this room has at one time or other gone to bed with fear or loss or doubt or insecurity or maybe terror or pain? And each of us has awakened, arisen, made whatever ablutions we could or wanted to make, seen other human beings and said, "Morning, how are you?" "Fine, thanks, and you?" And that's amazing. It's so exciting to me that somewhere, I don't know where it abides, this thing, maybe in the kneecap, in the bend of the arm. But wherever it abides, therein lies our nobleness. Not nobility, I think it's a pompous word, but the nobleness of the human spirit, that we actually rise. You may write me down in history with your bitter, twisted lies. You may trod me in the very dirt, but still like dust, I'll rise. Does my sassiness upset you? Why are you beset with gloom? Just 'cause I walk as if I have oil wells pumping in my living room. Just like moons and like suns, with the certainty of tides, just like hope springing high, still I rise. Did you want to see me broken? Bowed head and lowered eyes, shoulders falling down like teardrops, weakened by my soulful cries. Does my haughtiness upset you? Don't take it so hard, just 'cause I laugh, as if I have gold mines digging in my own backyard. You can shoot me with your words, you can cut me with your lies, you can kill me with your hatefulness, but just like life, I'll rise. Does my sexiness offend you? Oh. Does it come as a surprise that I dance as if I have diamonds at the meeting of my thighs? Out of the huts of history's shame, I rise. Up from a past rooted in pain, I rise. A black ocean leaping and wide, welling and swelling, bearing in the tide. Leaving behind nights of terror and fear, I rise. Into a daybreak miraculously clear, I rise. Bringing the gifts that my ancestors gave. I am the hope and the dream of the slave. And so, okay. Now I'm going to read. I'll read for maybe 10 minutes. I tried to guess how long it would take. If I start reading very fast like that, it means that I think I'm running out of time. Tosh became such a regular in the store that his arrivals raised no eyebrows, and black customers even began saying hello to him, although he only nodded a response. He had been discharged from the Navy and found a job in an electrical appliance shop. He had taken a room in the Negro neighborhood and came to the record store every day. We talked long over the spinning records. He said he liked to talk to me because I didn't lie. I asked how he had come to like black people so much. He said, I don't like black people. He was dead serious. And I don't like Italians or Jews or Irish or Orientals. I'm Greek and I don't even like them. I thought he was crazy. It was one thing to be introverted, but another to admit to me that he disliked black people. I asked, why do you dislike people? He said, I didn't say I dislike people. Not to like them isn't the same as to dislike them. He sounded profound. I needed time to mull over that idea. I asked if he liked children. He said he liked some children. I told him about my son, how bright he was and pretty and funny and sweet. He asked, does he play baseball? I hadn't thought about the physical games Clyde would share with the father. A new world appeared with the question. In my next castle building session, I would dream about a husband who would take our sons to the park to play baseball, football, basketball, and tennis, while our daughter and I made cookies and other refreshments ready for their return. I said, no, he doesn't play ball yet. He said, let's go to the park on your day off. I'll teach him what I know. I had not really examined Tosh before. He had thick black hair and the slow eyes of Mediterranean people. His face was gentle and had an air of privacy. He was handsome, but he fell some distance from the mark I had set for a husband. He was 2 inches shorter than I, and he was white. My own husband was going to come, handsome, 6'3" and black. I snatched myself away from the vague reflection and set a date for the three of us to go to Golden Gate Park. My son and Tosh liked each other. They played handball, and after picnic lunch, Tosh took a portable set from a package and began to teach my son chess. The day ended at my house, where I introduced Tosh to my mother. She was hospitable, just. She asked, "How did you come to meet Maya? Where are you from? And when are you coming back? And when are you going back?" Tosh held his own before that whirlwind of a woman. He looked directly at her, ignored the implied queries, answering only what he was asked outright. When he left, Mother asked me my intentions. I said, "He's just a friend." She said, "Well, remember that white folks have taken advantage of black people for centuries." I reminded her, "But you know a lot of white people. There's Aunt Linda and Aunt Josie and Uncle Blackie. Those are your friends. And Bailey has those friends, my brother, has those friends Harry and Paul, the table tennis expert." Mother said, "That's what I'm saying to you. They are friends, and that's all. There's a world of difference between laughing together and loving together." A few days later, I agreed to allow Tosh to take Clyde out alone. They came to the store as I was leaving, and Clyde was full of his afternoon. He said, "We rode on the cable cars and went to Fisherman's Wharf. I'm going to be a ship's captain or maybe a cable car conductor." His eyes jumped like targets in a game of marbles. He said, "Mr. Angelo is going to take me to the zoo next week. I'm going to feed the animals. I might become a lion tamer." He examined my face and added, "He said I could." Although Tosh had said nothing romantic to me, I realized that through my son he was courting me as surely as Abelard courted Heloise. I couldn't let him know that I knew. The knowledge had to remain inside me, unrevealed, or I would have to make a decision. And that decision had been made for me by the centuries of slavery, the violation of my people, and the violence of whites. Anger and guilt decided before my birth that black was black and white was white, and although the two might share sex, they must never exchange love. But the true nature of the human heart is as whimsical as spring weather. All signals may aim toward a fall of rain when suddenly the skies will clear. Tosh grew up in a Greek community where even Italians were considered foreign. His contact with blacks had been restricted to the Negro sailors on his base and the music of the bebop originators. I would never forget the slavery tales or my Southern past, where all whites, including the poor and ignorant, had the right to speak rudely to and even physically abuse any Negro they met. I knew the ugliness of white prejudice. Obviously, there was no common ground on which Tosh and I might meet. Yet I began to await his visits to the shop with an eagerness held in close control. We went to parks, the beach, and dinners together. He loved W.C. Fields and adored Mae West, and the three of us howled our laughter into the quiet, dark air of art movie houses. One night after I'd put my son to bed, we sat having coffee in the large kitchen. He asked me if I could read fortunes, and he put his hand in mine. I said, "Of course, you're going to be a great musician and be very wealthy and live a long, rich life." I laid his hand on the table, palm open. He asked, "Do you see where I'm going to be married?" I was thrust through with disappointment. While I hadn't ever seen him in my husband role, his attention had been a balm for my loneliness. Now he was saying he was planning marriage. Some childhood sweetheart, I suppose, would arrive on the scene. I would be expected to be kind to her and gracious. I looked at the shadowy lines in his hands and spitefully said, "Your love line is very faint. I don't see a happy marriage in your future." He caught my hand and squeezed it and said, "I'm going to be married and I'm going to marry you." The sounds refused to come together and convey meaning. "I am going to marry you." He had to be talking about me since he was addressing me. Yet the two words "you" and "marry" had never been said to me before. Even after I accepted the content of his statement, I found nothing to say. A white man, a poor white man, how can you even consider it? Disbelief struggled across her face. My mother's diamonds winked at me as her hands flew about in the air. A white man without a pot to piss in or a window to throw it out? She was famous for temperamental explosions, but she'd never been angry enough at me to hurl her full thunderbolt of rage. Now when I told her of Tasha's proposal, she was accelerating from an ing-bing, which was her phrase for a minor riot, to a full-out tantrum. With alarming speed, her pretty, butter-colored face became tight and reddened. She said, "Think of your life. You're young. What's going to happen to you?" I hoped not so much as had happened already. At 3 years old, I had been sent by train from California to Arkansas, accompanied only by my 4-year-old brother. I was raped at 7 and returned to California at 13. My son was born when I was 16, and determined to raise him, I had worked as a shake dancer in nightclubs, a fry cook in hamburger joints, a dinner cook in a Creole restaurant, and once had a job in a mechanic shop taking the paint off cars with my hands. She said, "Think ahead. What the hell is he bringing you? The contempt of his people and the distrust of your own. That's a hell of a wedding gift." And of course, I was bringing him a mind filled with a volatile mixture of insecurities and stubbornness, and a 5-year-old son who had never known a father's discipline. She asked, "Do you love him?" I admit I find that hard to believe, but then I know love goes where it's sent, even in a dog's behind. "Do you love him? Answer me." I didn't answer. "Then tell me why. Just why are you going to marry him?" I knew Vivian Baxter, my mother, appreciated honesty above all other virtues. I told her, "Because he asked me, Mother." She looked at me until her eyes softened and her lips relaxed. She nodded, "All right, all right." She turned on her high heels and strutted up the hall to her bedroom. Tosh and I were married in the courthouse on a clear Monday morning. To show her displeasure, my mother moved her 14 rooms of furniture to Los Angeles 3 days before the ceremony. We rented a large flat, and on Tasha's orders, I quit my job. At last, I was a housewife, legally a member of that enviable tribe of consumers whom security made fat as butter, and who under no circumstances considered living by bread alone because their husbands brought home the bacon. I had a son, a father for him, a husband, and a pretty home for us to live in. My life began to resemble, a Good Housekeeping advertisement. I cooked well-balanced meals and molded fabulous Jell-O desserts. I remember. My floors were dangerous with daily applications of wax. And our furniture was slick with polish. Clyde was sprouting with independence and opinions. Tosh told him often and with feeling that he was absolutely the most intelligent child in the world. Clyde began calling Tosh Daddy, although I had concocted and given him a dramatic tale during his younger years. The story told how his own father had died on the sands of some Pacific island, fighting for his life and his country. I could cry at the telling of the fiction, wishing so hard it had been true. Tosh was a better husband than I had dared to dream. He was intelligent, kind, and reliable. He told me I was beautiful. I decided that he was blinded by my color. And a brilliant conversationalist. The conversation came easy. He brought flowers for me and held my hand in the living room. My cooking received his highest praise, and he laughed at my wit. Our home life was an Eden of constant spring. But Tosh was certain the serpent lay coiled just beyond our gate. At last, I saw the first evidence of a reptilian presence in my garden. Tosh told my son that there was no God. When I contradicted him, he told me to prove his existence. I countered that we could not discuss an entity which didn't exist. He had been a debater at his university and told me that he could have argued either side for the same power, with the same power. However, he knew for a fact there was no God, so I should surrender the discussion. I knew that I was a child of God who existed, of a God who existed, but also the wife of a man who was angered at my belief. I surrendered. I tucked away the memory of my great-grandmother, who had been a slave, who told me of praying silently under old wash pots and of secret meetings deep in the woods to praise God. Her owner wouldn't allow his Negroes to worship God. It might give them ideas, and they did so on pain of being lashed. I planned a secret crawl through neighborhood churches. First, I took a nice dress to Yvonne's house and left it, explaining my intent. Then, on at least one Sunday a month, I would prepare a good breakfast for my family and an equally good lie in order to get out of the house. Leaving Clyde at home, I would hurry to Yvonne's, put on a Sunday dress, and rush to church. I changed sites each month, afraid that too many repeated visits would familiarize my face and that on some promenade with Tosh, I would be stopped by a church member and possibly ask about last week's sermon. The Evening Star Baptist Church was crowded when I arrived, and the service had begun. The members were rousing a song, urging the music to soar above all physical boundaries. I want to be ready, I want to be ready, I want to be ready to walk in Jerusalem just like John. Over and over the melodies lifted, pushed up by the clapping hands, held aloft by the shaking shoulders. Then the minister stepped away from the altar to stand at the lip of the dais. He was tall and ponderous, as befitted a person heavy with the word of God. He said, "The bones were dry." The simple statement sped through my mind. Dry Bones in the Valley was my favorite sermon. The song that whites had come to use in mimicry of the Negro accent, "Dim Bones," was inspired by that particular portion of the Old Testament. Their ridicule, the white ridicule, the toe bone connected to the foot bone connected to the ankle bone, in no way diminished my reverence for the sermon. I knew of no teaching more positive than the legend which said that will and faith called a dismembered skeleton dry on the desert floor to knit itself back together and to walk. I also knew that that sermon, properly preached, could turn me into a shouting, spinning dervish. I tried for the first few minutes to rise and leave the church, but the preacher swung his head to look at me each time I poised myself to leave. I sat again. He told the story simply at first, weaving a quiet web around us, binding us into the wonder of faith and the power of God. His rhythm accelerated and his volume increased slowly, so slowly he caught me off guard. I had sat safe in my own authority in so many churches and waited cautiously for the point in the service when the ignition would be sparked, when the saints would be fired with the Spirit and jump into the aisles, dancing and shaking and shouting their salvation. I had always resisted becoming a part, but the minister's voice boomed, "These bones shall walk." I say, "These bones shall walk again." I found myself in the aisle, and my feet were going crazy under me, slithering and snapping like two turtles shot with electricity. The choir was singing, "You brought my feet out the mire and clay, and you saved my soul one day." I loved that song, and the preacher's voice over it measured my steps. There was no turning back. I gave myself to the Spirit and danced my way to the pulpit. Two ushers held me in gloved hands as the sermon fell in volume and intensity around the room. He said, "I am opening the doors of the church. Let him come who will be saved." He paused as I trembled before him. He said, "Jesus is waiting." He looked at me, "Won't somebody come?" I was within arm's reach. I nodded. He left the altar and took my hand. He said, "Child, what church were you formerly affiliated with?" His voice was clear over the quiet background music. I couldn't tell him I had joined the Rock of Ages Methodist Church the month before and the Lily of the Valley Baptist Church the month before that. I said, "None." He dropped my hand, turned to the congregation and said, "Brothers and sisters, the Lord has been merciful unto us today. Here's a child that has never known the Lord. A young woman trying to make her way out here in this cruel world without the help of the ever-loving Jesus." He turned to four old ladies who sat on the front row. "Mothers of the church, won't you come? Won't you pray with her?" The old women rose painfully, the lace handkerchiefs pinned in their hair. I felt very much in need of their prayers because I was a sinner, a liar, and a hedonist, using the sacred altar to indulge my sensuality. They hobbled to me, and one said in a scratchy voice, "Kneel, child." 4 right hands overlapped on my head as the old women began to pray. Lord, we come to you today asking for a special mercy for this child. Amens and yes, Lord, sprang around the room like bouncing balls in a cartoon sing-along. Out, devil, out, one old lady ordered. She has come to you with an open heart, asking you for your special mercy. Out of this baby, devil. I thought about my white atheist husband and my son following in his non-believing footsteps and how I lied even in church. So I added, out, devil. The raspy voice said, stretch out, child, and let the devil go. Make room for the Lord. I lay flat on the floor as the congregation prayed for my sins. The 4 women commenced a crippled march around my body, singing. Soon one morning, when death come walking in your room, oh my Lord, what shall I do? They were singing their own dread of the promise of death, whose cool hand was even then resting on their shoulders. I began to cry. I wept for their age and their pain. I cried for my people who found sweet release from anguish and isolation for only a few hours on Sunday. I wept for my fatherless son, who was growing up with a man who could never understand his need for manhood. For my mother, whom I admired but didn't understand. For my brother, whose disappointment with life was drawing him relentlessly into the clutches of death. And finally, I cried for myself, loud and loudly, long and loudly. When the prayer was finished, I stood up and was enrolled in the church roster. I was so purified, I forgot my cunning. I wrote down my real name, address, and telephone number, shook hands with members who welcomed me into their midst and left the church. Midweek, Tosh stood before me, voice hard and face stony. He said, who the hell is Mother Bishop? I said, I didn't know. He said, and where the hell is the Evening Star Baptist Church? I didn't answer. He said, a Mother Bishop called here from the Evening Star Baptist Church. She said Mrs. Angelo has joined their church last Sunday. She now must pay $12 for her robe since she will be baptized in the Crystal Pool Plunge next Sunday. I said nothing. He said, I told her no one who lived here was going to be baptized anywhere at any time. I made no protest and gave no confession, just stood silent and allowed a little more of my territory to be taken away.